This is Jacqueline Whittington. She has been completely isolated from the rest of the world and forced to be a slave. And it's been 16 years since her torture began. It all started in the late 90s over in the UK. Jacqueline had recently just left her husband and 4 children, moving out to live by herself and start a new life. She lived on her own for a few years, and around 2004 she made the decision that it was time to move out and find a better place for herself. She found a nice place that suited her needs and was being rented out by what appeared to be a normal, friendly family. The mother of this family, a woman named Fazana Kausar, owned many properties around London and Brighton and offered to give a helping hand to Jacqueline by giving her some occasional jobs around her properties, which mostly consisted of some decorating. But as some time went by, Jacqueline found herself doing more and more work for Fazana and her family. After a while, Fazana insisted on Jacqueline moving in, and this would end up being the worst mistake she has ever made. With each passing year, Jacqueline became more and more enslaved to Fazana, being forced to live in her home and serve Fazana and her family, doing all the cleaning, cooking, babysitting, and all other sorts of housework for that matter. She was working 14 hours a day with little to no breaks, and Fazana showed no regards for her safety or well-being. She made Jacqueline travel between her properties all in different parts of London and Brighton to maintain them and work in them. During all this time, Fazana never provided her with any official paperwork or an employment contract. She just promised to pay her, and kept promising each and every time, with the promised payout never actually happening. In fact, something even worse happened because Jacqueline was receiving welfare benefits, and once Fazana discovered this, she wanted these benefits for herself. So after many years of pain and torment, Jacqueline no longer had the will to argue or stand up against her in any way, as this would lead to her getting more physical and mental abuse. With these benefits, Fazana began opening various different credit cards and bank accounts in her name. She then used the money on these cards to pay for her property bills, which in itself is quite a horrifying act. To make matters worse, she then used Jacqueline's disabilities in order to get her car registered for a disabled badge, allowing her to park in disabled parking bays as well as avoid road taxes. Fazana had practically stolen Jacqueline's whole identity and kept her enslaved, working many unpaid hours in her homes. But even with all that, Fazana wasn't satisfied with the level of control she had over Jacqueline. She wanted full authority over her whole life. So after breaking her down further, she eventually confiscated her basic essential possessions, such things as her passport and her bank cards. Fazana didn't want to risk having Jacqueline try and run away, or alert her family of what her current situation is, because at first her kids would visit her ever so often. But Fazana forced her to move around, going from house to house, and even going so far as to confiscating her phone and having her swap numbers multiple times. Eventually, her kids had no way of contacting her, and she completely lost touch with her whole entire family, with all of them having no knowledge of where she now resides. Even when the family would go on vacation, Jacqueline would not get a single break. Instead, they forced her to come with them and act as their personal maid for the whole entire vacation. Fazana would then humiliate her on numerous occasions to further weaken her mind and will to fight back, making her more susceptible to being under her control. Jacqueline wouldn't dare confront her about any of it because of the fear, knowing she would get severely hurt for doing so, and even a simple human error from Jacqueline was a justified call for violence according to Fazana. One time Jacqueline was exhausted, as always, from her many hours of hard labor, and as a result she forgot to put away some meat she had cooked for the family earlier and left it out on the kitchen table. Because of this, Fazana picked up a dustbin full of rubbish and threw it at her, and another time she smashed Jacqueline's glasses into her face and ripped off her necklace, and also slammed the car door into her ankle.
All my hair, she scratched my face. As I said, she slammed the door on my foot. She's broken my glasses, ripped my necklace, ripped a nightie.
As Jacqueline sank further into the depths of despair, she resorted to smoking and drinking alcohol as a coping mechanism to keep her going through all her troubles. She has been enslaved inside the houses doing the bidding of someone else, all while earning nothing to show for it. She has no social interaction whatsoever, and she is both physically and mentally abused. Not to mention she has all her possessions stolen from her, and even her income sources and her ties with her family have been completely severed.
She intimidates me. She humiliates me in front of people. That's what she's good at. She makes me feel about that big. In front of everybody. And I just stand there and put up with it. Because I didn't confront her about it, because she'd go for me.
Jacqueline wasn't even able to attend a hospital appointment on her own. She had to be accompanied by Fazana, who pretended to be her caretaker who looked after her. At one point, the doctors requested to talk to Jacqueline alone, but after a short amount of time, Fazana grew impatient, not knowing what she might be telling the doctors, so she went straight into the room, interrupting their private and confidential appointment. Her lack of communication with her family was so bad that she didn't know that her mother had already passed away until weeks later after the funeral had already taken place. This made her feel even worse as she was left with the lingering thoughts that what might her family be thinking, knowing she didn't even attend her own mother's funeral. They must have thought she was evil and didn't care about her mother. The thought of this further tore her apart, along with the fact that she never got to say her final goodbyes.
No contact with my family. And when I lost my mother, I found out 2 weeks later that she'd gone through a friend of my brother's, and I never even got the chance to say goodbye to her.
After some time, the Kauser family decided to hire a new nanny named Michelle Ormiston. And with some time working for the family, she began to notice that one of the family's workers was treated much more harshly than any other. She had no freedom and was physically abused and humiliated, and Michelle could see that she barely had any life left in her eyes, as if she had almost completely lost the will to live. After she had some confirmation of her suspicions, she quickly alerted social services, who then filed a report to the Sussex Police Department, making them aware of the situation. The police then acted on the report and decided to go and visit the address, an apartment in Hove, to get an up-close look of what was going on. They came to discover that Jacqueline was forced to sleep on a child's bed inside a little kid's bedroom, and all her belongings were stuffed tightly into black garbage bags. After questioning her and attempting to identify her, they noticed she had no form of identification whatsoever, not a single document. After searching the house, they found all the documentation that they were seeking inside one of the locked rooms that Jacqueline didn't have any access to. They also came to discover a collection of financial documents under Jacqueline's name that were listed to addresses that had no connection with Jacqueline herself. After digging a little deeper, their suspicions were confirmed. They then confronted Fazana in the presence of her family and Jacqueline, and they made the decision to arrest her under suspicion of assault and modern slavery offences.
If it wasn't for those two beautiful children, I'd probably be dead by now. Because I have come I've come that close to killing myself. Because I just can't take any more. But I can't because of those kids.
Luckily for her, she was able to post bail and returned home shortly afterwards. Jacqueline was then given a temporary living arrangement in Hove, to which she mysteriously just disappeared from. The police couldn't locate her and found that her new phone had been disconnected. However, months later, the police received a letter from her saying that all her past allegations against Fazana was to be dismissed, as it was nothing more than a mere scheme to get her into trouble and nothing more than that. Almost an entire year later, the police managed to locate Jacqueline in an apartment somewhere in London, and after talking to her again, the letter they received began to make sense. Fazana had forced Jacqueline to write that letter as a precautionary measure for her to get out of trouble safely and cover up all her inhumane crimes, if things were to go against her plans. Now Jacqueline was once again moved to a safe accommodation, and Fazana had been arrested once more, this time for attempting to pervert the court of justice. She then appeared in the Lewis Crown Court in October of 2020 and was charged with holding an individual in slavery and an additional charge for trying to pervert the court of justice. During her hearing, the prosecutor said this: "Over the years, Miss Causa began to control more and more aspects of Miss Whittington's life. Miss Causa took possession of her benefit book and removed her access to get money. Miss Causa promised to pay her for the work but didn't pay. She was given her benefit book to sign but was never given any money. She gradually isolated her and abused her in such a way that Miss Whittington became dependent upon Miss Causa. With more than sufficient evidence provided, the jury came to a swift conclusion within 3 hours, finding Fazana guilty of keeping a person in slavery and servitude and perverting the court of justice. She was sent to jail for another month while waiting for her sentence to be given, which then came in late November. She was sentenced to 6 years and 8 months in prison. You would think that's quite a short sentencing for such crimes, especially considering the fact that she enslaved someone for over 16 years. Many people believe that she should at least serve the same amount of time, but after all the suspicious transactions that had taken place, the police eventually restricted her assets and began conducting a thorough investigation to find out an estimation of just how much she might have owed Jacqueline for all her unpaid work and for stealing her benefits. Over the course of the next 3 years, Fazana was still in prison, while the police investigation continued. Meanwhile, Jacqueline attempted to return to a normal life. On October 26 of 2023, they finally came to a decision that after Fazana had been unlawfully binding and forcing Jacqueline to work for her for over 16 years, she would be given 3 months to pay her £198,000. This includes the stolen benefits as well as her unpaid wages. Many people who are aware of the case thought that this was nowhere near a severe enough punishment for Fazana, nor did Jacqueline receive the compensation she deserved after being enslaved and abused both physically and mentally, and having a significant portion of her life taken from her and wasted. The authorities responded saying that Jacqueline was paid according to the minimum wage amounts for each of the years, but many people commented online on the case saying that after doing the calculations, this number wouldn't even be close to the amount she was due to be paid, especially if you account for the benefits that was taken from her, which amounted to £80,000 alone. Fazana was also made to pay an additional £7,000 for national insurance payments. The current whereabouts of Jacqueline is unknown, but she is currently living somewhere in the UK, waiting for her payment. Meanwhile, Fazana has another 3 years to serve in prison, and then she is once again free to roam the streets. When she is released, she'll be around 62 years old, and most likely will still have her property empire and the means to do this torture all over again. And if so, the next time may be even more horrifying if she avoids her mistakes. But hopefully this doesn't happen. Had Michelle Ormiston not speak up about this matter and report it, it's very likely Jacqueline would have spent the rest of her life enslaved to Fazana, so it's important to speak out if you see something's not right, and hopefully Jacqueline can return to her family and find happiness again. If you have any scary stories to share, you can send them over to storiesofdespairbusiness@gmail.com.